Oh, so we started this conversation last week about despicable church, and I'm so passionate about this conversation, and I get really, really, really fired up, and I mean every single thing that I said last week. I just want to be really clear. I would always rather err on the side of grace than on the side of meanness, and I got fired up last week, and I came right out of the gate, and I was like, I might be a little mean this week, and I don't ever want that to be the characteristic by which I am known. And so if I came across as harsh, I still mean everything I said. I would just hope to say it maybe with an edge of grace about me that maybe I didn't bring to the table last week. I still mean everything I said. I should have said it with a bit of grace last week. So I guess this is my way of saying, if I came across as harsh last week, I beg your pardon. And I want to represent Jesus well, and I think Jesus would have said, well, we did read what he said last week, but maybe he would have said it with a bit of kindness that might have been lacking in my heart last week. And so, again, I apologize. Am I forgiven? Yeah. Good, thank you. All right, so I don't know if this was on purpose, but I did see that there are purple lights up here. I don't know if that has any significance. Print? Yeah, some of you, I don't know what that means. It's okay. So let's talk about despicable church. All right. So one of my favorite days of the year is Special Olympics. I absolutely love Special Olympics. And I'm going to brag a little bit. I actually have a daughter who is in the Special Olympics. And this is Lexington and her BFF, Ellie. And Lex is in the Special Olympics. And she did really good this year, won some medals. In fact, she actually has it on today. We did not plan for her to wear that. She just came down this morning, had it on. Like, that's really cool. I'm actually going to brag on it a little bit. But I love the Special Olympics, and the reason I do is because when you go there, it's pretty obvious that everybody there has some form of a disability. Everybody there there's something that's not fully working there, whether it's their arms or their legs, maybe it's a cognitive issue, but it's pretty quickly obvious that everyone who's participating in this has something going on that quote-unquote normal people may not have to contend with, all right? Some form of a disability. And yet what I love so much about this environment is that no one makes excuses for it. Like, it's obvious that everyone has some form of a disability or some kind of a dysfunction or something's not working that should be working, but nobody makes excuses for it. Nobody denies it. Nobody tries to hide it. And when I go there, I'm like, this is amazing. Everybody's just wide open about this is who I am. These are the issues I deal with. I love that because also in that environment, what I see is that when someone falls, everybody runs to help that person. When someone is struggling, it's amazing to watch the attention that turns to that person and not to criticize, not to pass judgment, but to help. The encouragement, the support, it's amazing the stuff that happens in that environment. When someone wins or even tries real hard, everybody's screaming and carrying on and dancing and celebrating the hard work and the success and the good effort that this person put forward. And in that environment, it's a day that's just filled. There's hundreds of people in all ages, really, from young to senior citizens who have disabilities who are there and they're being celebrated. There's encouragement, there's affirmation, there's instruction, there's celebration. It's an amazing environment, and every year I love that. I love to go to that event. Now, every year that I'm there, I think to myself, I wish that families were more like this. I wish that families were encouraging, and I wish that families were affirming. I wish that families were a place in which we could grieve with one another. When someone's going through a difficult time, we would grieve together. When someone is doing well, we would celebrate together. I wish that family units were like that. My experience as a pastor and my experience as a man is that oftentimes family units are not like that. In fact, oftentimes in family units, there's a lot of dysfunction. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of bitterness. There's a lot of stress. There's strife. Family oftentimes becomes something to be avoided rather than to be moved towards. And it hurts my heart because I don't think that's the way that God wants it to be. And so several years ago, I discovered a guy named Pete Scazzaro, and he's done an incredible amount of writing that's been very helpful for me. The first book I ever read of his was called The Emotionally Healthy Church. And he's gone on to write other books like The Emotionally Healthy Leader, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. He makes a great case. He's like, look, You can be a Christian, but if you haven't addressed the emotional issues in your life, you're still going to have all kinds of dysfunctions. He's really, really good writer. But anyways, one of the things he says in this book in particular that's been very helpful for me is this. He says, our family is the most powerful, influential group that has affected who we are today. Like the family that you grew up in is the most influential group of people in your life. And so in this book, that's the case he makes. In this book, he gives a list of questions. And he says, when we're trying to understand our family background and how it's impacted us, he said, here's some questions to ask. Describe each family member with 3 adjectives and their relationship. So for instance, if you were to think about your dad, don't say them out loud, but what are 3 words that you would use to describe your dad? How about your mom? A sister or a brother? So you get these 3 words, right? And he said, describe your parents' relationship. Like, was it a healthy relationship? Was there a lot of fighting? Were there secrets that they kept from one another? Was it tense? Did they argue out loud? Did they never argue? I mean, what was that like? How was conflict handled in your house? Was there lots of anger? Was there tension? How were gender roles worked out in your house? So like, how were women viewed in your house? Right? That's one of the questions he asked. How were men viewed? Was there mutual respect? Was there love? How well did your family do in talking about feelings? Did you talk about them? Did you deny them? Did you cover them over? How would your family describe you? How would you think that your family talks about you? Growing up, did your family talk about sex? Did they talk about sexuality? Did they never talk about it? Were there any family secrets? All these questions. Like, these are really important questions asked. What was considered success in your family? How did you handle money? How did you address spirituality? Was church important? How about holidays, relationships with extended family? Did you get together at family get-togethers? It's interesting to have all these conversations growing up in my life. We didn't have family reunions. Like, I have cousins I've never seen. I have uncles and aunts I've seen once in my life. Never did that. Married into Sherry's family, and they got together every single year. That was an interesting dynamic, right? He goes on and on. How did your family's ethnicity shape you? What kind of addictions were in your family, if there were any? How about traumatic losses? On and on and on. So he says, all of these things that were part of the family that you grew up in, they have significantly shaped the person that you are. And then he says this, unless we grasp the power of the past on who we are in the present, we will inevitably replicate those patterns and relationships inside and outside the church. In other words, if you grew up in a home in which yelling and fighting was normal, guess what you're going to do in your relationships right now? Probably going to yell and fight. If you grew up in a home in which sexual misfunction or sexual dysfunction was normal, you're probably going to bring that to your new set of relationships. If you grew up in a home in which laziness was normal, you'll probably bring that. Unless you acknowledge it and address it, what you know is what you'll do. Does that make sense? Okay. Important. This is important. So family, this group that we grow up in, is incredibly important for the person that we become. But in most instances, because all of us are broken somewhere, is that right? Would you agree with that? Nobody brings a perfect 100 to the table. Everybody's broken somewhere. Most family units at some point have some kind of dent or dysfunction or disability or shortcoming. Even if you had a great family experience, there's a high likelihood that at some point, reflecting back on your early years in your family unit, there's something that was missing. Maybe something that wasn't done, maybe something that was done. The point was there was some kind of a deficit in your early years. Now, one of my favorite authors, and a guy that's helped me think through a lot of just the chaos of life, like how does a Christian, how does somebody who believes in God and follows Jesus, how do we view the chaos of life? And a guy that's really helped me is a gentleman named Larry Crabb. And he wrote a book called Men of Courage, which has been incredibly helpful for me. And in this book, I'm going to share a quote with you. He says this. He says, when we admit how deeply we long for a father, a man who walks ahead of us, letting us know what is possible and calling us to follow, and a brother, a peer whose struggles and compassion encourage us to make ourselves known to him as we walk together. He says, we continue to walk the path to maturity. Those words are missing on this slide. We continue to walk, in other words, we get more mature. We grow emotionally, we grow spiritually, we grow mentally, we grow relationally. when we admit how deeply we long for a father. Does that make sense a little bit better? Okay. In other words, there's something inside us that wants someone to look ahead to, a father figure, and if you're a lady, oftentimes even a maternal figure, someone to look ahead to and say, hey, here's how you live life. Here's how you do marriage. Here's how you do spirituality. Here's how you handle conflict. When we begin the process of maturation, we look ahead and have that figure ahead of us, and then someone beside us, a friend, a brother, a sister, like this is something that we all want, right? Okay, is everybody all right? This is really, really important. Okay, so he says, we begin the trip to maturity when we acknowledge that, all right? I want someone ahead of me, and I want some beside me, okay? And then he says this, which is critical. When the reality hits us, as it will for most men and women, right, that we have neither father nor brother, the overwhelming disappointment can either turn into bitterness or it can drive us to seek God with all of our hearts and to become fathers and brothers for other men. Now, he's writing specifically to men, but the truth of the matter is this, and this is the point he's making. When we sit down, not every single person, but lots and lots of people, if and when we're honest, would have to say, I desperately wish for and desperately need someone ahead of me who can show me how to do life, who can encourage me as I'm doing life, who can put an arm around me and love me well. Someone who's ahead of me, a father figure, a mother figure. I desperately need that. And if I'm honest, that figure's not there. And I also desperately want someone to do life with me, a brother or a sister, someone who's close to me, some same age group, some similar life station, who's doing life. I desperately need these roles filled in my life. And for lots and lots of people, what the reality is there's not that father figure, and there's not that brother or sister figure. And the truth is, Larry Crabb says, when we hit that point, one of two things will happen. Either we will become bitter and angry and live our lives like that, frustrated, disappointed, or, he said, we can make a decision and turn towards God. Now, he says, look, because the truth is, there are some of you in this room that have great fathers and great family figures, great fathers, great mothers. Your home life was phenomenal. Larry Crabb says this to you. This is what he says. For those few who know the joy of being well-fathered and richly brothered, the calling is not merely to enjoy these blessings, but to provide the same one for others. Now listen, we're going somewhere with this. What I'm saying to you is that all of us have inside of us this incredible longing to be a part of a family unit where we're loved and encouraged and instructed and affirmed and much like the Special Olympics. We all have this strong desire to be a part of a family. Many of us, however, have not been a part of that kind of family, and we're looking for something like that. This is what Crabb says. Again, I want to go back and look at this. When the reality hits us, as it will for most men and women, that we have neither father nor brother, the overwhelming disappointment can either turn into bitterness. Gosh, let me just say this to you. Please hear me on this. If you're in this room and you're disappointed with family, you can live the rest of your life angry and hostile and holding grudges and bitter, or it can drive us to seek God with all of our hearts and to become fathers and brothers for other people. Now, this is what's really important. If you read through the Bible, one of the ways you'll see God referring to himself over and over again is as Father. And basically, as I understand the scriptures, what God is looking at us and saying is this. For those of you who have been raised in a dysfunctional environment, for those of you who are disappointed with or don't have a father figure, for those of you who have been raised and you feel lonely, you feel abandoned, you're disappointed in what your family has turned out to be, here's an invitation. God says, I will be your father. And it's interesting because one of the things that he calls the church in the Bible is the family of God. God is essentially saying, I will be your father, and I will include you in my family. That's pretty significant, isn't it? Because there's lots and lots of people who have grown up in dysfunctional homes, who've been disappointed with father, who've been disappointed with mother, and now all of a sudden God says, I'll be that father, and I'll provide you with a new family. It's called the church. I mean, if you think about it, look at this. Church is a second chance at family. It's a place where we can find and discover people who are ahead of us. In our church, I love to look around because in this room, there are people who are ahead of me spiritually. There are people who've been a follower of Jesus longer than I've been alive. There are people who've been married longer than I've been alive. There are people who've already done parenting well for many, many years. There are people who've learned all kinds of things financially. There are people who've learned how to deal with conflict. And as a follower of Jesus, I can look to them and they can play a father or mother role. There are friends in this room who are my new brothers and sisters as a part of the family of God. Does that make any sense? And this is God's invitation to everyone, but especially to people who say, to be honest with you, I might not ever say it out loud, but to be honest with you, I find myself disappointed with the way my family turned out. God says, I have an answer for you. I'll be your father. Be a part of my family, which is called the church. I heard someone say that friends are God's way of apologizing to us for our family. You ever hear that? God's like, dude, that didn't turn out well. Let me give you some new friends. A new family, and he calls it the church. And I know in this room, if we were to go around and tell the stories of family, there would be some heartbreaking stories in this room. But what I want to say to you is that God has a second chance for you. It's called this, the church. Now, I'll admit right up front, we've all got some issues, right? There are plenty of times where we don't do it right. There are plenty of times, we say things wrong. We make mistakes. We have judgment issues that we don't do well. We have plenty of problems. But the truth is, we acknowledge those, and then we turn around and we encourage one another. We affirm one another. We love one another. We instruct one another. From time to time, we confront one another. One of the best illustrations of this was a while back. I was in the gym with my friend Dave, who's sitting right here. And I was doing a squat, and Dave looked at me and said, dude, that looks like crap. Now, he could have been nicer, but he was right. It didn't look good. And because he cared enough about me to confront me, I fixed some things, and it got better. This is what family does. We love, we encourage, we affirm, we confront, we instruct, we do life together. Now, there are lots of people who've never had that kind of an opportunity. And this is one of the things that the church is to provide. Now, let me tell you something, and this is critically important. Christianity is not something that we do alone. There's a mistake out there, I believe. Lots of people think I can follow Jesus and do it alone. Well, the question was, can you go to heaven if you never go to church? Sure. But it's kind of like trying to live a healthy life on, Little Debbie's and chocolate milk. Right? I mean, the truth is, can you live on Little Debbie's and chocolate milk? Maybe. But there's so much better out there. The church provides a family, a place in which we can figure out life and unlearn some unhealthy ways of living and learn some healthy ways of living, a place where we're surrounded by people who love us and know us and encourage and instruct us and affirm us. I mean, truth is, nothing can grow by itself. It needs outside sources. A plant can't grow by itself. It needs some dirt. It needs some sunshine. It needs some water. And if you're going to grow spiritually, and if I'm going to grow spiritually, if we're going to grow in our life, if we're going to become a better person, we've got to have the input of others. I mean, this is what Christianity is all about. It's about a relationship with God, and it's about a relationship with one another. I believe it's very, very difficult to do Christianity alone. So this is what the church does. We're a place where anyone can discover God, connect with friends, and become a better person. So I want to show you how this works in a despicable church. St. Paul wrote a letter to a church in the city of Corinth. And this church had some crazy stuff going on. This was a crazy church. I'm telling you, if the church in Corinth were right here right now, and it probably is, we're just better at hiding it. But if you're right here right now, religious leaders across the country would say, that is not a church. That's a crazy, messed up group of despicable people. But remember what we talked about last week. Mark told us a story about Jesus, and he said a lot of his followers were really messed up people. In fact, the religious leaders of the day looked at Jesus and said, your followers, why do you hang out with such scum is the word they use. Why do you hang out with such scum? Why do you hang out with despicable, messed up, funky life people like that? Why? And Jesus said, look, this is who I came for. These are my people, the messed up ones. And so we made the case last week that if this is the place, the church, this new family that God is creating is a place for people whose lives are crazy messed up. So Paul writes this letter to this church in Corinth, and he starts off in chapter 1 of 1 Corinthians by saying, hey, you guys are saints. We could actually do this right now. Just turn to the person to your right and say, hey, you're a saint. Go ahead and do that. It'll be good. You're a saint. I hear you laughing, right? Paul looked at him in 1 Corinthians 1, and he said, you're the holy ones. You are the holy ones. Interestingly enough, like when you think of saint, you think of Mother Teresa, right? I mean, and then you look at yourself, you're like, dude, no. Paul looked at these people and said, you're saints, you're holy ones, you're the church. And then you start reading this letter. And in chapter 3, Paul says, look, I'd love to teach you some deeper things about the Christian faith, but the truth is, you guys are still arguing, and you're jealous, and you're acting just like people of the world, is what he says. Crazy. Despicable, right? And then in chapter 5, Paul says, look, here's something kind of crazy. You have somebody in your church that's having sex with his stepmom, and you guys are okay with that? That's kind of crazy. And then in chapter 6, he says, you're the holy ones, you're the saints, but you keep fighting each other, and you're actually taking it out of this building, and you're going out to the courts, and you're suing one another in front of all these unbelievers. And the thing that's supposed to represent us more than anything is the way that we love each other. Come on, church, right? And then in chapter 6, again, he says, and listen, I got to talk to you this. You're still having sex with prostitutes. Like, Christians aren't supposed to do that. And then in chapter 8, he says, lots of you who are following God, you still believe there are lots of gods. And then in chapter 11, he said, here's another problem. From time to time, church, we have communion. Most of you know what communion is, right? Where we do the Lord's Supper. Paul said, when we go to do that, some of you get together early and you eat all the food. And then other people come in and they can't have any because you ate all the food. What's wrong? So I'm reading through this. I'm like, man, if I were the pastor of that church, holy moly. These are some mess. This is a crazy group of people. And yet Paul says, you're the church. You're the holy ones. You're the saints. Now, the truth is, if every single thing were known about every single one of us, some of this stuff might actually be going on, right? I mean, there's some craziness in this room, no doubt about it. So here's what I want to say about the church. This was a crazy group of people, but Paul looked at them and said, you are the church, a group of people who had discovered God and was following Jesus. But that's only the first step in being a Christian. Discovering God and following Jesus. There's something else that happens when you become a part of the church. Crazy, messed up people discovering God, connecting with Jesus, right? But Paul said, listen, towards the last part of this letter, is everybody awake? All right, everybody good? We're getting to the stuff right here. Paul said, towards the end of his letter in 1 Corinthians, he said, look, something happens when we believe in Jesus. He actually begins to live inside of us with his Spirit. The Spirit of God actually lives inside of us. And he gives us something. He gives us something that the Bible calls a gift. It's an ability. It's a skill. It's a talent. And here's what Paul said about it. A spiritual gift is given to each one of us so we can help each other. So you've got this crazy bunch of people whose lives are dysfunctional. There's disabilities. There's bad attitudes. There's bad practices. There's this lacks of integrity, and they're all coming together. They're believing in Jesus. They're growing. They're getting stronger spiritually. And now Paul says, look, God has given you an ability, a gift, inside of every single one of you, and the reason He gave you that is so that you can help each other. And then Paul launches into so let me just stop and say this. Like every single person in this room, if you have said, I believe in Jesus and I'm going to follow Jesus, the Spirit of Christ inside of you has given you an ability. And the reason He gave that to you is not so that you can do church alone at home online. He gave you that ability so that you could be a part of a family and help one another. So, Paul goes into this really important illustration. I'm going to show you something. You ready? All these body parts. Can you see them good enough? Like all these different body parts. Now, this is what St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. He says, the human body has many parts, but the many parts make up one whole body. So it is with the body of Christ. So, like you look at your body, there's fingers, there's a hand, there's an arm, right? There's foot, there's a leg, there's a nose, there's an eye, there's a mouth. All these different parts make up the entire body. And Paul said, this is how the church works. All of us in this room make up this church. And then he said something really important. Some of us are Jews, some are Gentiles, some are slaves, and some are free. But we've all been baptized into one body by one Spirit, and we all share the same Spirit. And let me point this out to you, because this is really important for us at our church. Paul said the church is comprised, in this room, he said there are some Jews and there are some Gentiles. If you don't know, that was racial differences. One of the things we talk a lot about at our church is we want Sunday to look like Monday. If there is not diversity in the church, there's a problem. And then he went on to say some are slaves and some are free. That's economic diversity. In the church, again, we want Sunday to look like Monday. Paul said there should be different racial diversities. There should be different economic diversities in the church. He said what brings us all together is the fact that we believed in Jesus, and he's put his Spirit inside of us, and he's helping us and giving us a gift that can help other people. Does that make any sense? That's why we always say at our church, we want Sunday to look like Monday, because diversity is very important. Now let's go back to this body chart. Paul said all these different body parts make up one body. And then he said this. The body has many different parts, not just one part. If the foot says, I'm not part of the body because I'm not a hand, that doesn't make it any less part of the body. In other words, if the foot just says one day like, hey, I'm not like the rest of you guys, I don't fit in here, that would be kind of weird, wouldn't it? Of course we need our feet. They're part of the body. And then he says, if the ear says, I'm not part of the body because I'm not an eye, would that make it any less part of the body? Let me just tell you something. This is really important. Some of you in this church are kind of like feet. Not that you smell, but you're just kind of like feet. And you may look around and say, I don't really fit here. Let me tell you something. If you leave, the body's missing something. If you decide, well, I don't know that church is for me, the body's missing something. Some of you are like an eye. You bring different abilities and skills and passions and insights to the table. And you may look around and say, I don't really fit here. Listen, if you leave, the body's missing something. If you decide I'm checking out of church, the body is missing something. And then Paul says something really important. He said, this is what happens in church sometime. You ready? What's that? That's Pluto. I'm kidding, it's an eye. This is what he says. He says, if the whole body were an eye, how would you hear? Now, this is going to be important, all right? There are some churches that will say, if you're not an eye, you don't fit here. Paul basically would say to those churches, if all you have is an eye, you're not a body. There are some churches that will say, if you don't do things exactly the way they do, that we do, you're not going to fit here. Paul would look at them and say, then you're not a body. That would be like having a family reunion where where everybody was exactly like your dad. That would be weird, wouldn't it? Paul says, sure, you need your dad, but you need your mom, and you need that weird uncle, and you need your cousins, and you need and you know what I'm saying? Every family has got to have all parts. And so I'm looking out at this group, and I'm like, every single person in this room makes this church what it is. Paul says again, he said, look, if your whole body were an ear, first of all, that's a hilarious image to me, like an ear, right? How would you smell anything? Again, the point is this. If everybody's exactly alike in the church, the body doesn't work. The family doesn't work. It's critical and important that each one of us be the person that God made us. So I'm reading C.S. Lewis a while ago, and he wrote a book called Mere Christianity, and I want to read you something he said. He said, Christianity thinks of humans not as mere members of a group or items in a list. Christianity thinks of people as organs in a body, an eye, an ear, a nose, a foot, different from one another, and yet each contributing what no other person could contribute. In other words, there are things I can do in the church that you cannot do. There are things that you can do in the church that I cannot do. That's what a body does. An ear cannot smell, an eye cannot hear. But everything's part of an important part of the body. And then C.S. Lewis says this. This is important. Look, let me go back here. I've said that a million times this morning, haven't I? This is important. Yeah, but because it is, and this is so critical. All right, here we go. This is what C.S. Lewis says. When you find yourself wanting to turn your children or pupils or even your neighbors into people exactly like yourself, remember that God probably never meant them to be that. You and they are different organs intended to do different things. Let me say to our church, in our church, there are going to be different people with different skill sets, with different passions, with different attitudes, with different outlooks on life, perhaps even some with different theologies. You know what? It's okay. It's what makes us a body. It's what makes us a great family. He also says this, Lewis says this. On the other hand, when you're tempted not to bother about someone else's troubles because they're no business of yours, remember that though he is different from you, he's part of the same organism as you. Now, this is important because if something's wrong with my ear, well, let me just tell you this. This morning I woke up, my eyes were all red. They're burning. I'm like, oh, geez, I got to have an important conversation with our church today, and it looks like I had a rough night, you know? So I went over to CVS and got some eye drops. I paid attention. My eyes were burning, and they were all red, and so I paid attention to them because part of my body was hurting. And that's what we do. When you're working and you smash your finger, what do? Do you ignore it? Of course not. Our whole body like folds around that finger like, oh, we make noises. We go get ice. We whine for a while because we pay attention to the hurting part. And C.S. Lewis simply is saying this. When part of your body hurts, all of the body pays attention to the finger that's hurt because it's part of our body. Paul says it like this. He says, our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where he wants it. How strange a body would be if it only had one part. There are many parts, but only one body. The eye can never say to the hand, I don't need you. The head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. And then he says this, all the members care for each other. If one part suffers, all the parts suffer with it. And if one part is honored, all the parts are glad. This is Paul's description of how a church should function. And when I see that, I'm like, that's what the Special Olympics looks like. That's what makes the Special Olympics so incredibly important. Because when one part is doing well, everybody's excited. When one part is hurting, everybody's sad. And this is what the church is supposed to be like. And maybe you've had experiences with church that don't look like this. Maybe you've had experiences with your family that don't look like this. But this is how God's family is intended to function. When one part is doing well, everybody's on the sidelines saying, way to go! And when one part's in trouble, everybody's running to help. Paul ends his idea like this. All of you together are Christ's body, and each of you is a part of it. So I just want to look out and say to every single one of you in this room, if you are a follower of Jesus, you are necessary, you are needed, you are a part of this family. This is how church is done. A group of crazy people who do not have everything figured out, whose lives are dysfunctional, who don't always believe the right things, who sometimes have bad attitudes, who are still struggling with habits and all kinds of addictions. All that craziness, just like the church in Corinth, all of this craziness, Paul looked at them and said, you are the Christ's body. You're the church. You're God's family. The church is a place where everyone matters and has something to do. The church is a place where we grieve with one another and celebrate with one another. The church is a place where everyone is supposed to be connected to someone and everyone counts. And I love how God takes people who are broken and discouraged and arrogant and angry and despicable, and he brings us together into a family where everyone is welcome and everyone is needed. This is how the church is described in Scripture. Now, I want to talk to you as a family. This is Church 180's heartbeat, is to be this place where anyone can discover God, connect with friends, and become a better person. And we believe that as these things happen, people actually begin to make 180s in their life. They begin to see transformations in attitudes. They become freed from addictions. Their relationships begin to change, on and on and on. Now, every family has seasons. Here's what I mean by this. Do you remember when you were, this may not apply to everybody, but to a number of people, You remember when you were single, right? Life looked one way. And then you got married and things began to change. It was a different season in life. And then you had kids, right? That was a crazy season, wasn't it? And then your kids started to grow up, and then they went to college and moved out, and then they got married, and now you're a grandparent. Like, every season of life looks different. Think about it like this. Like, summer is summer. There's just things you do in the summer that are completely different than the things you do in the winter, because every season brings with it changes, right? So our church is actually headed into a new season. And so there are changes that are coming. And we've actually named this season. We're calling it Grow. So if you're visiting with us today, this is actually a good time for you to be here, because we're going to tell you a little bit about what's happening in our church. And I hope you'll listen in and maybe even join the family, because to be honest with you, this would be a great place to grow. And if you're part of Church 180, I really want to encourage you to lean in and listen to these next few minutes, because I want to show you a video that kind of explains what this journey that we're going on as we create this place, as we build this church, as we create this family, what this next season of life in our church is going to look like, all right? We're going to roll a video, and then after the video, our usher's going to come, and they're going to hand out a little booklet to you, and I'll walk you through that, all right? Everybody, here we go. I've always wanted to be a part of a church where anyone could discover God easily. This desire was fueled when I read a story of the early church who was experiencing this influx of lots and lots of new people, most of whom who had no idea how to live the religious life. They had no clue how to live a Christian life. So there's all kinds of conversations about what kind of rules and what kind of guidelines should be placed on these believers. St. James, who was one of the early leaders in the church, after listening to lots of these conversations, finally sat down and wrote a letter. And in Acts chapter 15, verse 19, he wrote these words: "We should not make it difficult for people who are turning to God." And when I read those words, my heart resonated with that, and I knew right away that's the kind of church I want to be a part of. Now, this is the passion and the vision of Church 180, to be a place where anyone can discover God, connect with friends, and become a better person. We place a high value on authenticity and love. And because of our faith in Jesus, we are honest about our shortcomings and optimistic about our future, and we're creating a place where anyone and everyone can have a similar experience. Now, over the last couple of years, we've grown as a church from the infancy stage to the toddler stage. We're getting better at helping people discover God, and we're getting better at helping people connect with friends, and we're getting better at helping people become a better person. Now, we've grown spiritually and numerically, and now it's time for us to grow again. If you've been here any time at all, you've heard the story of our church. It's the story of how a pastor was staggering out of a failed church plant. He was disheartened, discouraged. And the story of a church plant right here in Rock Hill that after 10 years was ready to call it quits. The two of us came together and we agreed, let's not stop, let's start over. And so we did. Church 180 was born. And on July 5th, 2009, our first Sunday here, there were 26 people. This past Easter, there were over 200 people worshiping God in this facility. And we're super excited about what God is doing. He's growing us spiritually, and He's growing us numerically. This is the story of Church 180, a place where discouraged, disheartened, confused, frustrated, disconnected people can find love, encouragement, and hope, and the courage to do a 180. We have a problem. Experts say that when a room is 80% full, it's maxed out. We're there. It's becoming increasingly difficult to find a place to sit, especially if you come in late. We have a space problem. We currently lease our existing facilities, and multiple times over the last several years, we've been given a heads up that there might be another group coming in who would be able to pay a higher dollar for our existing space. It doesn't make a lot of sense for us to continue investing in a space which has no future. So, we have a space problem in a space in which we have no future. We've identified 3 options to deal with this problem. Option number 1, we can stop growing. We can close the church doors and tell anyone new who might come into the church,
Unfortunately, because of spacing issues, you can't come here. You'll have to find your way some other place. You'll have to discover God and make friends and become a better person in some other venue. Well, we're not good with that option. So we looked at option number 2, which is buy what we can afford. Now, our church doesn't have any debt, but neither do we have an aggressive savings account. The problem that a lot of churches in our position make right now is that they buy what they can afford. Now, if we were to do that, we would end up with some tiny little shack way off in McConnell's Mills. And we're confident of this. God has called us to do ministry in this area. We really want to stay in this area. The third option is the best one for us. To maximize our current space while aggressively saving money to allow us to make our next move with financial strength. By simply moving some walls, we can virtually double our seating. So we have in place a plan to move these walls and will be completed by September of this year. This third option is fueled by this idea. We want to create space for as many people as possible now while avoiding debt as much as possible later. So here's how we're going to do that. After consulting with multiple counselors, both internal and external, we've decided that the best way for us is to commit to raising $950,000 over the course of the next 2 years. This number is the compilation of 2 years' worth of operational expenses, plus additional monies saved that will allow us to continue doing ministry, continue making space for more people, while preparing to make our next move. When we began discussing how we're going to make space, immediately we all agreed that we wanted this to be more than just a money thing. We wanted to create an opportunity for our church to grow spiritually, for you and for me, to all of us grow spiritually. Of course, we need to raise some money. We need to make some space. But we want it to be more than just money. We want this to be a time for all of us to make some important steps with our faith. One day I was reading in my Bible in Philippians chapter 1, where St. Paul wrote a letter to the church in Philippi. And when I read these sentences, these words gripped my heart. And I knew right away, this has got to be the theme of these next 2 years. I pray that your love will overflow more and more, and that you will keep on growing in knowledge and understanding. When I shared these verses with our pastors and our advisory team, we all agreed these verses have to be the theme for this next 2-year journey. And now we're asking our church, all of us, to make a commitment to grow spiritually, so that we will be ready to do what God is calling us to do and give generously so that we can make space for the people who will come here. So that's what we have committed to do. Take big steps spiritually and make big commitments financially so that we can grow in every way. Over the next 2 years, we're going to be encouraging you and providing resources for you to make important decisions, significant decisions in your faith, to help you grow spiritually. Additionally, we're going to be encouraging you and showing you how you can participate financially to help us create space for people who are going to come to Church 180. Now, this is a really significant time in the life of our church and in your life. It's an opportunity for us to grow spiritually and to create an environment where other people can discover God, connect with friends, and become a better person.
What I want to do is I just want to explain just real quickly what this is, and then we'll get out of here and beat the Baptist to Mose. Is that a good deal? All right. This is an important part of the life of our church, and I'm super excited about what this is going to do for all of us, spiritually and as we create a space, all right? So when you get this, I'll just kind of I'll walk you through it. There's just a couple spots I want to show you. You'll open the front page. There's a letter from me, and me surrounded by a bunch of beautiful ladies. That's a great life. And then there's a little part where it's going to tell you the backstory of our church. I encourage you to take some time and read through this. It basically talks about the things that we talked about on the video, our problem that we currently have, and the solution that we've identified. What I want to do is I want to take you to a place, it's on page 8, where it talks about how we can all participate in this. Now, let me tell you, this is important stuff. So when you get your notebook, open up to page 8. There you go. Yep, good deal. So what we did here was we took the page 8. We said, here's our goal. This is what we need to raise over the next 2 years. And this includes every dollar that comes in, operational expenses and savings account. And basically what we did is we broke it down and said, look, if we have one person, all right, you see this, one person who says, hey, over the next 2 years, I'll commit to give $120,000. And that includes what you normally give, plus what you say I'll give in addition to that. What that looks like, you'll see that we've broken down the amount. If given monthly, that would be $5,000 a month. Given weekly, it's $1,153.85 a month for a total commitment of $120,000. Now, all of us in this room say, yeah, I'd like to do that, but the reality is I can't. So let's drop down to, let's drop all the way down to the green, all right? Listen, I'm a daddy, and my kids come to church here, and they love what happens at church here, and I want them to be able to participate in this. So as we were working on this, we said, this isn't just something for people who have money. It's something for the kids, too, and people who may not have a lot of extra margin financially. And so we created in the green, it's a place where even our kids can participate. So, for instance, at the very bottom, if we have a child who says, hey, I want to participate in this thing, so over the next 2 years, I'm going to give $52. Here's what it would break down to. It would be $2 a month or 50 cents a week for a total commitment of $260. In other words, as you look at this thing, there's a place where everyone can participate because what we believe is that the church is for everybody. It's not just for those who have, it's for those who don't have. It's for everybody, all right? And so what we're encouraging you to do is to take this, to look at it, to pray about it, to begin thinking about how can I participate in this Grow Fund? How can I participate in growing spiritually? Because here's what we talk about all the time. When you create space in your budget, God does something in your heart in that space. It's crazy. It's true. All right? And so in your wallet or in your book, there is what we call a commitment card. So if you take that out, I want to show you something real quick. It's got that little giving chart on there, and you can look at that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And so here's how you fill out a commitment card. What we're going to do is I want you to take this home and pray about it and think about it and talk about it and mull over it. And on May 15th, all of us are gonna bring these cards in and we're gonna give them together. All right? And on a commitment card, basically what it looks like is what I normally give in a year. So I just filled one out and let's just say you normally give $1,000 a year to make math easy. Line number 1, $1,000, what I normally give in a year. Line number 2, my additional commitment. So in other words, you said, all right, I normally give $1,000. So because I want to be a part of growing, I'm going to give an extra 1,000. Does that make sense? All right? So 1,000 plus 1,000 is, hey now, there you go. Times 2 is, very good, $4,000. So basically you're saying over the next 2 years, I'm going to commit to give $4,000, but I want to get my giving ramped up a little bit, so I'm going to give a one-time gift of $500. So your total commitment over the next 2 years would be $4,500. All right, that's really simple math. So what we want to do is we're asking every single person in our church, even the kiddos, to participate, all right? So we want to give you several weeks to process, to pray, to think about, to talk about, to plan. How can I participate? And on May 15th, what we're going to do, on May 15th, we're going to bring our big commitment offering. So we're all going to bring these cards. Now, let me tell you this. If you pledge to give $5,000, you don't have to give it on May 15th. You have 2 years to give it. Does that make sense? All right? Now, but basically you're saying this is the amount that I'm going to give. And the reason we'd like to know on May 15th, is so that way we can plan responsibly as a church for the next 2 years, because we want to handle our finances responsibly. So on May 15th, that's when we're all going to bring these together. All right? And we'll make our big church commitment on that date. May 22nd, we're going to have what we call a big commitment offering, and that's where, or a big give offering, and that's where we're all going to bring our one-time gift. So you might say, hey, over the next 2 years, I'm going to give $2,000, but I want to give a one-time gift of $500. I'm going to bring that on May 22nd, all right? And you'll see more information about that in this book, which I encourage you to check out. Now, I know there's all kinds of questions, so what we've done is we've actually, Joe and I have been meeting with all the life groups to answer questions and to hear the things that you're asking and wondering about. We've been talking. But we know that not all of you are in life groups. So there's 3 ways that you can find out more information about what's going on in this whole Grow campaign. If you, our website is church180.tv. If you go to our website, on the lower right-hand corner, there's a little icon that says Grow. If you click on that, we're going to keep that updated with all kinds of information and news. Additionally, we'll keep Facebook updated, facebook.com/mychurch180. And then we're going to host, we have planned for 2, coffee and questions. And if we need more, we'll do that. There are sign-ups in the back. And what we want to do is we're just going to bring it in. We'd like to limit each group to 12. If we need more, we'll do that. But the reason we want to limit it to 12 is so we can have as much conversation and answer as many questions in depth as necessary. So there's sign-up sheets. There's one at the cafe, and there's one at the back table out there. If you are interested in being a part of that, please sign up, and we're going to address every question you have, all right? No questions off bounds. So coffee and questions. That's how we're going to address all of these questions. Here's the thing, guys. We're in the process of making a family. We're in the process of creating a place where anyone, no matter what their past, no matter what their story is, can discover God, connect with friends, and become a better person. That's the heartbeat of all of this, okay? And so some people may not understand the despicable church. Some people may drive past and say, that's just a bunch of crazy people, and I don't get it. I drive past there, I see the people. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't look like a church. But as I understand St. Paul and as I understand Jesus, that's what the church looks like. A bunch of crazy people coming together, discovering God, connecting with friends, and becoming better people. That is the heartbeat of the church. And that's where we're headed as a church, all right? So take some time, read through this over the next couple of weeks. Take this, pray about it, think about it, begin thinking, how can I be a part of this Grow campaign? And on May 15th, that's where we're all going to bring our cards, and that'll be a big day for us, all right? Good? All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pray, and then we're going to head out to beat the Baptists or the Presbyterians to Moe's, all right? Jesus, we think you're absolutely extraordinary. I look around this room, and I see the stories in this room. I know my own story, and I know what I find in the church is a second chance at family. There's people who are ahead of me, and there's people who are beside me. And Lord, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful, Lord, that you have created a place where we get a second chance at family. I thank you, Lord, for filling up your church across the globe with people whose lives are dysfunctional and broken and disappointed, and giving them a second chance, giving them opportunities to do 180s. And that's what our church is about. And God, we want to grow spiritually, and we want to create a place for others and more to discover this family that is your idea. And so I pray as we launch into this journey called Grow, that you would give us courage, you would give us wisdom, help us to plan well, help us to manage well the things, Lord, that you've given to us. And Father, as we do all this, we'll pray it, Lord, that you will be made famous in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our homes. Lord, this is our big prayer. In the name of Jesus, amen.